My knees hit wet concrete before I even understood I was falling. Pain moved through my side like a wire pulled tight, and for a moment the world narrowed to the sound of my own breath, ragged and shallow, bouncing off brick walls that smelled of rust and rain. I did not know the men who had done this to me. I only knew their voices, low and impatient, telling me this was a warning, not a punishment, as if there was a difference that mattered to my body right now. I pressed a hand against my ribs and felt something shift beneath my palm that should not shift. The alley stretched ahead of me, narrow and dark, lit only by a flickering sign above a side door that read, "Employees Only." I had walked past that door 100 times without a second glance. Tonight, it might be the only way out. I tried to stand, and the world tilted sideways. My shoulder scraped against the wall as I caught myself, and the sound that came out of my mouth was not a word, just breath, forced through clenched teeth. Somewhere behind me, footsteps retreated, unhurried, confident that I was no longer a problem worth watching. They were wrong. I forced one foot in front of the other, counting them silently, because counting was the only thing keeping panic from swallowing me whole. 10 steps, 20. My vision kept blurring at the edges, black creeping in like spilled ink, and I blinked hard to push it back. I thought about my brother, about the message he had sent 2 days ago that I still had not answered, about how this might be connected to whatever trouble he had buried himself in this time. Headlights swept across the alley entrance, cutting through the dark in a slow, deliberate arc. I froze, half expecting the men to return, but the car that rolled to a stop at the mouth of the alley was not the one they had arrived in. It was long and black, polished enough to catch every scrap of light the street had to offer, and it did not belong here any more than I did. The rear door opened before the car had fully stopped. A man stepped out, unhurried, the kind of unhurried that told me he had never once in his life needed to rush toward anything. He wore a dark coat that fit him too well to be anything but tailored, and even in the dim light, I could see the sharp line of his jaw, the way his eyes moved across the alley once, cataloging everything, before landing on me. I braced myself against the wall, ready to run if running was still something my body could manage. He did not approach quickly. He walked the way a man walks when he already knows how a situation will end, each step deliberate, his hands loose at his sides. "Do not move too fast," he said. His voice was low, controlled, the kind of calm that did not match the violence still humming in the air around us. "You will make it worse." "Who are you?" The words came out cracked, barely more than a whisper. He crouched in front of me instead of answering right away, studying my face the way a doctor might, searching for something I could not name. Up close, he looked younger than I expected, though there was nothing young about the stillness in his expression. His eyes were dark, almost black in this light, and they held mine without blinking, without the polite discomfort most strangers showed when confronted with someone else's pain. "My name is Adrian," he said finally, "and you are bleeding from somewhere I cannot see, which means you are hiding an injury that needs attention faster than you think." I laughed, and it hurt so much that the laugh turned into a cough. "I do not need help from a stranger in an alley." "You do not need help from most strangers," he agreed, standing and offering his hand. "Fortunately for you, I am not most strangers." Behind him, 2 men had stepped out of the car, both dressed in dark suits, both watching the alley entrance with an attention that told me they were not there for decoration. One of them scanned the rooftops. The other kept his eyes on the street beyond, hand resting near the inside of his jacket in a way that made my stomach tighten. "Who broke your ribs?" Adrian asked, and something in the way he said it made the question feel less like curiosity and more like a promise. I did not answer. I could not with strangers standing 3 feet away and my brother's name sitting heavy on my tongue, unspoken. Whatever secrets I was protecting felt too large to hand to a man I had known for less than a minute. "I am fine," I said instead, the lie so obvious that even I did not believe it as it left my mouth. Adrian tilted his head slightly, studying me the way someone studies a puzzle they already know the answer to but want to watch you solve anyway. "You are not fine. You are standing because your body has not yet told you how badly it wants to fall. Let me take you somewhere safe. I do not know you." "No," he agreed, "but you know what is behind you in this alley, and I suspect that frightens you more than I do." He was right. And the fact that he was right frightened me even more. I glanced past him at the car, sleek and out of place, and then at the man himself, calm in a way that felt earned rather than performed. Everything about him suggested danger, dressed in good manners, the kind of danger that did not need to raise its voice to be obeyed. A sharp pain flared through my side, sudden and blinding, and my knees buckled before I could stop them. Adrian moved fast, faster than someone his size should have been able to move, catching me before I hit the ground again. His hands were careful, almost gentle, avoiding the places where I flinched without needing to be told where those places were. "Ribs," he murmured, more to himself than to me. "Possibly two. You need a doctor, not a hospital that will ask questions you do not want to answer." "How do you know I do not want to answer questions?" "Because you have not told me your name, and you have had every opportunity." A faint, humorless smile touched his mouth. People protecting a secret rarely volunteer information, even the harmless kind. I wanted to argue, but the pain in my side was making it difficult to string thoughts together, let alone words. He guided me toward the car with a steadiness that felt less like control and more like care, though I could not decide which unsettled me more. One of his men opened the door without being asked, and I found myself lowering into soft leather seats that smelled faintly of cedar and something colder underneath, like metal. Adrian slid in beside me, close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from him, far enough that it did not feel like a threat. The door closed with a soft, expensive click, sealing out the alley, the rain, the men who had left me broken against a brick wall. "Where are you taking me?" I asked, my voice thinner than I wanted it to be. "Somewhere they will fix what is broken and ask nothing in return," he said. "Consider it a kindness with no strings attached." Kindness always has strings. His eyes flicked to mine, something sharp and amused passing through them, before disappearing again. "Perhaps. But mine are patient. They do not pull until you are ready." I studied him, in the dim light of the car, trying to read the shape of the man sitting beside me. Everything about him spoke of control, precision, a life built on decisions made quickly and without regret. And yet there was something in the way he watched me, something that did not match the cold efficiency of his men, or the quiet danger radiating from every line of his posture. "You still have not told me who broke your ribs," he said again, softer this time, as if giving me another chance to answer honestly. I turned my face toward the window, watching the city blur past in streaks of light and shadow. "Does it matter to you?" "It matters a great deal," he said, and for the first time since he had stepped out of the car, his voice lost its careful calm, replaced by something colder, something that promised consequences for whoever had left bruises on a stranger he had only just met. "I intend to find out either way. You may simply save us both some time." I closed my eyes, exhaustion and pain pulling at me in equal measure, and said nothing. The car moved smoothly through the night, carrying me farther from the alley, and deeper into a world I did not understand yet, one where a stranger's calm voice felt more dangerous than the men who had hurt me, and far more difficult to refuse. A phone buzzed somewhere near the front seat, and one of the men glanced back through the mirror before answering in a low voice I could not quite follow. Adrian did not react outwardly, but I felt his attention sharpen beside me, the air in the car shifting into something more alert. Whatever the call was about, it was not casual. "Everything all right?" I asked, surprising myself by caring at all. "Nothing that concerns you tonight," Adrian said, though the tightness in his jaw told a different story. He turned his head toward me instead, deliberately changing the subject. "Tell me your name at least. I would rather not keep calling you the woman from the alley in my own head." I hesitated, weighing the risk of even that small piece of information. "Elena," I said finally. "Elena," he repeated it slowly, as if testing the weight of it. "A good name, steady. You say that like you know me." "I know enough," he said. "I know you walk 20 paces on broken ribs, rather than call for help. I know you lied to me twice in the space of 5 minutes to protect someone who is not here to protect you back. That tells me more about a person than a name ever could." The observation landed closer to the truth than I wanted to admit, and I turned back toward the window rather than let him see it register on my face. Streetlights slid past in long yellow smears, the city indifferent to the small, private disaster unfolding inside one of its passing cars. "You are very sure of yourself," I said. "I have to be," he answered simply. "Uncertainty gets people killed in my line of work." I wanted to ask what his line of work was, though some instinct warned me I already suspected the answer and would rather not have it confirmed out loud. Not yet. Not while I was trapped in a car with no ribs strong enough to run, if the truth turned out to be worse than my imagination. The car slowed as it turned onto a quieter street, one lined with old brownstones and trees that blocked most of the streetlight from reaching the pavement. My pulse picked up despite the exhaustion pulling at every part of me. Wherever we were going, it was somewhere private, somewhere off the record, and I was not sure yet whether that made me safer or simply harder to find. "We are almost there," Adrian said, as if reading the tension climbing through my shoulders. "No one at our destination will ask your name, your history, or why you are afraid to answer either question. You have my word." "Your word," I repeated. "From a man I met 10 minutes ago in an alley. From a man who has not once given you a reason to doubt him since," he corrected gently. And for reasons I could not fully explain, I found myself believing him, even as every rational part of my mind insisted that I should not. The car came to a smooth stop outside a building, with no sign, no number visible from the street, only a plain black door, and a single light glowing above it, like an invitation meant for people who already knew where they were going. Adrian stepped out first, offering his hand again, and this time I took it without arguing, because the pain in my side had finally won its long battle against my pride. "Whatever happens next," he said quietly, guiding me toward the door, "you are safe now. That much I can promise you." I did not know yet whether to believe him, but as the door opened and warm light spilled out into the cold night, some small, exhausted part of me chose to hope that he was telling the truth. The room they brought me into smelled of antiseptic and old wood, an odd mixture that somehow felt more comforting than any hospital I had ever visited. Soft light came from a lamp in the corner, rather than harsh overhead bulbs, and the walls were lined with shelves of books instead of medical charts. It looked more like a study than a place where people treated injuries, and yet a man in a plain shirt was already waiting for us, his sleeves rolled up, a leather bag open on the table beside him. "This is Dr. Marsh," Adrian said, guiding me toward a worn but comfortable chair. "He does not ask questions he does not need answered." Marsh gave me a brief, professional smile, and gestured for me to sit still while he examined my side. His hands were steady, practiced, moving with a gentleness that surprised me given the circumstances. I hissed when his fingers found the worst of the bruising, and he murmured an apology without looking up. "2 ribs," he said after a moment, glancing toward Adrian rather than me. "Cracked, not broken. She will need rest, and something for the pain, but nothing that requires a hospital stay if she takes care of herself." "Good," Adrian said, though his eyes stayed on me the entire time, watching my reactions the way someone studies a language they are only beginning to learn. I sat still while Marsh wrapped my ribs with practiced efficiency, my mind spinning through everything that had happened in the last hour. An alley, a stranger, a car that did not belong on that street, a house with no name that treated injuries without paperwork. None of it added up to anything ordinary, and the longer I sat there, the more certain I became that ordinary was not a word that applied to Adrian at all. "You are staring," he said, without turning to look at me directly, though the corner of his mouth twitched with quiet amusement. "I am trying to understand who you are. A reasonable pursuit. Most people give up before they get very far. I am not most people." "No," he agreed, and something in his tone suggested he had already decided that much for himself. "You are not." Marsh finished wrapping the bandage and stepped back, giving me quiet instructions about rest and medication, before excusing himself from the room with the same discretion he had shown throughout the entire visit. The door closed softly behind him, leaving Adrian and me alone in the warm light of the study, the silence between us stretching long enough to feel deliberate. "You never answered my question," he said finally, taking the seat across from me, his posture relaxed but his attention sharp as a blade. "Who broke your ribs?" I considered lying again, weighing the consequences of another half-truth against the exhaustion pulling at every part of me. But something about the room, about the quiet way he waited without pushing, made the lie feel harder to hold on to than it had in the alley. "I do not know their names," I said finally, which was true enough to feel safe. "They found me outside the club where I work. They said it was a warning." "A warning for what?" I hesitated, my fingers twisting together in my lap. "For a debt that is not mine." Adrian's expression did not change, but something in his eyes sharpened, focused, the way a hunter's attention sharpens at the first sign of a trail worth following. "Whose debt is it?" I shook my head, unwilling to hand over my brother's name to a man I still did not fully understand. "It does not matter. It is being handled." "Clearly not," he said, gesturing toward my side with a pointed look. "Since it resulted in this." The observation stung more than I wanted to admit, mostly because it was true. I looked away, toward the shelves of old books lining the walls, searching for something to focus on besides the growing unease twisting through my chest. "You do not have to protect whoever this is," Adrian said, his voice softer now, though no less certain. "Not from me, at least. I do not know you well enough to trust you with something like this." "Fair," he said, surprising me with how easily he accepted the boundary. "Then let me earn that trust, rather than demand it." I studied him carefully, searching for the catch, the hidden motive that had to be lurking somewhere beneath his calm exterior. Men like him, dangerous men with expensive cars and private doctors, did not simply offer kindness without expecting something in return eventually. "What do you want from me?" I asked bluntly. "Nothing, tonight," he said. "Tomorrow, perhaps, I will want to know more. But tonight, I want you to rest, and I want the men who did this to you to understand that they made a mistake choosing you as a target." "Why does it matter to you? You do not know me." Adrian leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on his knees, his dark eyes holding mine, with an intensity that made my breath catch despite the pain still radiating through my side. "Because I found you broken in an alley, and something about the way you refused to ask for help, even as you could barely stand, told me you have spent a long time protecting people who do not protect you back. I find that difficult to walk away from." The honesty in his answer disarmed me more than any lie could have. I did not know how to respond to a man who spoke plainly about things most people hid behind careful, polite deflection. "You are very strange," I said finally, and he laughed, a low, genuine sound that softened the sharp lines of his face. "I have been called worse." The tension in the room eased slightly, replaced by something quieter, more careful, though not entirely comfortable. I studied his hands, resting loosely on his knees, and thought about the men outside the car, the way they had watched the street like soldiers rather than drivers, the quiet authority in every word Adrian spoke without needing to raise his voice. "What do you do?" I asked, though part of me already suspected the answer. He considered the question for a long moment, as if deciding how much truth I could handle tonight. "I run businesses," he said finally. "Some of them are exactly what they appear to be. Others are not." That is not an answer. It is the only one I am willing to give tonight. I let the subject drop, too tired to push further, though the unanswered question settled heavily in my chest, a weight I would carry alongside the ache in my ribs. Adrian stood, crossing to a small cabinet near the window, and returning with a glass of water and a small folded packet Marsh had left behind. "For the pain," he said, handing both to me. "You should rest here tonight. It is not safe to return home yet, not until I understand who sent those men after you. I cannot stay here." "You can, and you will," he said, though his tone remained gentle rather than commanding. "Consider it a small price for the help you have already accepted." I wanted to argue, but exhaustion was winning the battle against my stubbornness, and some quiet, cautious part of me recognized the wisdom in his words, even as the rest of me resisted the idea of depending on a stranger for safety. I swallowed the medication and drank the water in silence, watching him watch me with an expression I could not quite name. "Why does this feel like more than kindness?" I asked quietly, more to myself than to him. Adrian's eyes softened, just slightly, the sharp calculation behind them giving way to something gentler, something almost hesitant. "Perhaps because it is," he admitted, though I could not tell you why, not yet. The honesty of the admission settled strangely in my chest, warm and unfamiliar, tangled together with the lingering fear from the alley and the ache still throbbing beneath my bandaged ribs. I did not trust easily, had not trusted easily in years, and yet something about the quiet certainty in his voice made it difficult to hold on to my usual caution. "You still have not told me what kind of businesses you run," I said, partly to fill the silence, partly because the question genuinely nagged at me now that the pain medication had begun to soften the sharpest edges of my discomfort. Adrian considered me for a long moment, as if weighing how much of the truth I could carry tonight without it becoming another weight on top of everything else. "I own a shipping company," he said finally. "Legitimate, on paper. Several restaurants, a construction firm that has built half the buildings on the east side of this city." "And the parts that are not legitimate? Those are not conversations for tonight," he said, though there was no sharpness in his voice, only a kind of tired honesty. "You have enough to worry about without adding my complications to the list. Your complications nearly got me killed in an alley." "No," he corrected gently. "Someone else's complications did that. Mine only found you afterward." I studied his face, searching for the lie in his words, but found none, only a tired kind of certainty that made me believe he had told me as much truth as he was willing to offer for the moment. Outside, faint sounds of the city drifted through the window, muffled by thick glass and heavy curtains, a reminder that beyond this quiet room, an entire world continued moving without pause for either of us. "Tell me about your brother," Adrian said, his tone gentler now, coaxing rather than demanding. "Not the debt, him. What is he like?" The question caught me off guard, softer than I expected from a man who moments earlier had spoken with such quiet authority. "His name is Daniel," I said slowly. "He is younger than me by 4 years. Kind, mostly. Reckless, sometimes. He fell into bad company after our parents passed. People who promised him easy money and gave him nothing but trouble instead. And you have been covering for his mistakes ever since." It was not a question, and the accuracy of it stung more than I wanted to admit. Someone has to. Even when it costs you your own safety. "Especially then," I said quietly. "He is the only family I have left." Adrian was silent for a long moment, his gaze distant, as if the answer had unlocked something in his own memory he had not expected to revisit tonight. "I understand that more than you might think," he said finally, though he offered nothing further to explain the comment, and I did not push, sensing the boundary as clearly as he had respected mine earlier. "Do you have family?" I asked, curiosity outweighing caution for the moment. "I did," he said simply, the 2 words carrying a weight that discouraged further questions. I let the subject drop, recognizing the same careful protection in his voice that I carried whenever anyone asked too much about Daniel. The quiet between us settled into something almost comfortable, strange given the circumstances that had brought us together only hours earlier. I found myself studying the room instead, the worn spines of old books, the soft light casting long shadows across polished wood floors, searching for clues about the man sitting across from me, a man who spoke of shipping companies and construction firms, while men with guns waited outside in cars built for something far more dangerous than deliveries. "You keep looking at me like you are trying to solve a puzzle," Adrian said, breaking the silence with quiet amusement. "Maybe I am. Find anything?" "Only more questions," I admitted, and he smiled, small and genuine, softer than anything I had seen from him since the alley. "Good," he said. "Questions mean you are paying attention. That will serve you well in the days ahead." Something in the way he said it, calm but edged with warning, sent a small chill through me despite the warmth of the room. Before I could ask what he meant, a soft knock interrupted the moment, and one of the men from the car stepped inside, murmuring something low into Adrian's ear. Whatever he said caused Adrian's expression to shift, the warmth from a moment ago replaced by something colder, more focused. He excused himself briefly, promising to return, and I watched him leave with a strange, unfamiliar reluctance tightening in my chest. Alone in the quiet study, surrounded by books I did not recognize, and a silence too heavy to be comfortable, I allowed myself, finally, to feel the full weight of everything that had happened tonight. The alley, the pain, the stranger who had appeared out of nowhere and refused to let me disappear back into it. I did not know what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time since the men had cornered me outside the club, I did not feel entirely alone in facing it. When Adrian returned several minutes later, his expression had smoothed back into careful calm, though something in his eyes told me whatever news he had received was far from good. He sat across from me again, studying my face with quiet intensity. "I need you to tell me everything," he said finally, "starting with your brother's name." My breath caught. "How did you know?" "Because the men who attacked you were not collecting a random debt," he said grimly. "They work for someone I have been watching for a long time. And if they are involved, your brother is in far more danger than a few bruises." The warmth of the room seemed to dim slightly under the weight of his words, and I realized, with a slow, sinking certainty, that whatever safety I had found tonight was only the beginning of a much larger storm. I did not sleep that night, not really. I drifted in and out of a shallow, restless doze in the guest room Adrian had insisted I use, my body too sore and my mind too crowded with questions to settle into anything resembling real rest. By the time gray morning light crept through the curtains, I had already decided that staying hidden in a stranger's house, no matter how safe it felt, was not something I could allow myself to do while Daniel remained out there, tangled in whatever danger Adrian had refused to fully explain. I found him downstairs in a kitchen far too large for one man living alone, standing near the window with a cup of coffee he had not touched, his attention fixed on something outside I could not see from where I stood. "You should be resting," he said without turning around, somehow aware of my presence before I had made a single sound. "I need to see my brother." He turned then, studying my face with the same careful attention he had shown the night before, searching for whatever certainty lived behind my words. "That is not a good idea. I do not care whether it is a good idea. He is my brother, and if the men who did this to me are connected to whoever you are watching, then he is in danger, and I am not going to sit in a stranger's kitchen while that happens." Something flickered across Adrian's expression, frustration tangled with reluctant understanding. He set the untouched coffee down and crossed the room, stopping close enough that I had to tilt my head slightly to hold his gaze. "If you insist on going, you will not go alone," he said finally, his tone leaving no room for argument. "And you will listen to everything I tell you, without hesitation, no matter how it feels in the moment." "Why would you help me do something you clearly think is reckless?" "Because stopping you would only mean you find another, more dangerous way to do it yourself," he said, a faint, humorless smile touching his mouth. "At least this way, I can control some of the risk." I did not argue further, too grateful for the offer to question the motive too deeply. Within the hour, I found myself back in the same black car from the night before, my ribs aching with every small movement, my nerves stretched thin as the city passed by outside the tinted windows. Daniel lived in a small apartment on the far side of the city, in a building that had seen better decades, the kind of place where the elevator rarely worked, and the hallway lights flickered without warning. Brian insisted on walking beside me the entire way, his men trailing at a careful distance, watching every doorway and stairwell with the same quiet vigilance I had noticed the night before. The apartment door was unlocked when we arrived, which sent a cold spike of fear through my chest before I had even stepped inside. I pushed it open, calling Daniel's name into the dim, cluttered space, and found him sitting on the edge of a mattress in the corner, his head in his hands, a half-packed bag beside him. "Elena?" He looked up, startled, guilt flashing across his face the moment he saw me, followed quickly by confusion when his eyes landed on Adrian standing just behind me. "What happened to you? Who is this?" "I could ask you the same thing," I said, crossing the room and kneeling in front of him despite the protest my ribs sent through my side. "Daniel, what did you get yourself into?" He looked away, guilt and fear tangled together in his expression, the same expression he had worn since he was a teenager, whenever he had done something he knew would disappoint me. "It was supposed to be a simple loan," he said quietly, "enough to cover the debt from the last mistake. I did not think it would spiral like this." "They broke my ribs, Daniel." His head snapped up, horror replacing the guilt on his face. "What? Why would they go after you?" "Because I am the only leverage they have left," I said, the realization settling heavily in my chest even as I said it aloud. "You have nothing left to take from you. so they came for me instead. Adrian stepped forward then, his presence filling the small apartment with a quiet authority that made Daniel straighten instinctively, the way people straighten in the presence of someone they recognize as dangerous, even before they know why. "Who holds the debt?" Adrian asked, his voice calm but edged with something colder beneath the surface. Daniel hesitated, glancing between us. "A man named Victor Hale. I do not know much about him, only that the interest kept climbing every week, faster than I could ever hope to pay it off." Something shifted in Adrian's expression at the name, a tightening around his eyes that told me this was not the first time he had heard it. "Victor Hale," he repeated quietly, more to himself than to either of us. "That explains a great deal." "You know him," I said. "I know of him," Adrian corrected. "He has been expanding into territory that does not belong to him for months now. Small loans to desperate people, followed by debts that grow faster than anyone could reasonably pay, followed by collection methods that leave bruises when they do not leave bodies." The casual way he mentioned bodies sent a fresh chill through me, though Daniel flinched more visibly, his guilt deepening into something closer to genuine terror. "I did not know," Daniel said quietly. "I swear, Elena, I did not know it would get this bad." "I believe you," I said, though the words did little to ease the anger still burning beneath my worry. "But believing you does not fix this." Adrian crouched slightly, bringing himself to Daniel's eye level, his expression unreadable, but his voice carrying a quiet weight that filled the small room. "How much do you owe him?" Daniel named a number that made my stomach twist, far larger than I had expected, larger than either of us could hope to repay through any honest means. "And how long have you had to repay it?" 2 weeks, Daniel said. After that, he said the terms change. "They always do," Adrian said grimly, standing again, his attention shifting toward the window, as if calculating something far beyond the walls of this apartment. "Pack a bag. Both of you. You cannot stay here, and you certainly cannot stay separated, not with Hale's men already willing to use Elena as leverage." "Wait," I said, standing despite the protest from my ribs. "What exactly are you proposing?" Adrian turned back to face me, his expression carrying the same calm certainty it had held since the moment he stepped out of that car in the alley. "I am proposing that you both stay somewhere I can protect you, while I deal with Victor Hale directly." "Deal with him how?" "That is not something you need to concern yourself with tonight." "It is exactly something I need to concern myself with," I said, frustration sharpening my voice despite the ache still radiating through my side. "You cannot simply take control of my life and my brother's life without telling me what that actually means." Something in my tone seemed to catch him off guard, a flicker of surprise crossing his face before settling back into careful neutrality. "Fair," he said finally. "I intend to buy the debt from Hale myself, at a price he will not be able to refuse, and remove both of you from his ledger permanently." "Just like that?" "Nothing about dealing with Victor Hale is simple," Adrian admitted. "But yes, just like that, eventually." Daniel looked between us, confusion and cautious hope mixing across his face. "Why would you do that for people you barely know?" Adrian's gaze flicked toward me before answering, something unspoken passing behind his eyes that I did not fully understand yet. "Because your sister refused to abandon you, even when it cost her nearly everything," he said quietly. "That kind of loyalty is rare enough that I find myself unwilling to let it be punished." The answer settled strangely in my chest, warm and unfamiliar, tangled together with the exhaustion and fear still clinging to every corner of the day. I did not fully trust the ease with which he offered to reshape our entire situation, but something about the steady certainty in his voice made it difficult to doubt his intentions, even as every instinct warned me that men like him rarely did anything without expecting something eventually in return. We packed quickly, Daniel's hands trembling slightly as he shoved clothes and scattered belongings into a worn duffel bag, while Adrian stood watch near the door, his attention split between the hallway outside and the quiet, tense conversation Daniel and I exchanged in low voices. "You trust him?" Daniel asked quietly, zipping the bag closed. "I do not know yet," I admitted, "but I trust him more than I trust the alternative." Daniel studied me for a long moment, something knowing settling behind his eyes despite the fear still lingering there. "He looks at you like you matter to him already, and you have known him less than a day. Do not start, I warned, though heat rose in my cheeks despite myself. I am just saying, Daniel said, a faint, tired smile tugging at his mouth despite everything. Men like that do not usually offer to erase debts for strangers. Before I could respond, Adrian's voice cut through the apartment, low and urgent. We need to move. Now. The shift in his tone sent adrenaline flooding through my veins, chasing away the exhaustion that had settled into my bones. I grabbed my bag and followed him toward the door, Daniel close behind, my heart pounding loud enough that I barely heard the sound of a car engine revving somewhere in the street below. Too close, too deliberate to be a coincidence. They found us, Adrian said grimly, positioning himself between the door and both of us, his hand moving instinctively toward the inside of his coat. Stay behind me. Whatever fragile safety I had believed we found in this apartment evaporated in an instant, replaced by the same sharp, breathless fear that had gripped me in the alley the night before. Except this time, Daniel's life hung in the balance alongside my own, and the man standing between us and whatever danger waited outside was still, in so many ways, a stranger I had only just begun to understand. Adrian moved to the window, angling himself so he could see the street below without exposing more of himself than necessary. Whatever he saw made his jaw tighten. 2 cars, he said quietly. 4 men, possibly more inside. This is not a coincidence. Someone told Hale we were here. Told him how? Daniel asked, his voice cracking slightly. It does not matter right now, Adrian said, already moving toward the door. What matters is getting you both out through the back stairwell before they reach this floor. He pulled a phone from his coat and spoke a single low sentence into it, something about a rear entrance and a countdown, before slipping it back into his pocket. My pulse hammered against my bruised ribs as he guided us out of the apartment and into the narrow hallway, the flickering overhead light casting uneven shadows across peeling paint. Quietly, Adrian murmured, leading us toward a stairwell door at the far end of the corridor. And quickly. We had barely reached the stairwell when voices echoed up from below, low and purposeful, unmistakably searching. Adrian pressed a hand against my shoulder, guiding me back against the wall, out of the direct line of the stairs, while Daniel pressed close beside me, his breathing shallow and fast. There is another way down, Adrian whispered, nodding toward a narrow service door tucked beside the stairwell, easy to miss unless you already knew it was there. Freight elevator, slower, but they will not expect it. We moved as quietly as the old building allowed, the freight elevator groaning to life with a sound that felt far too loud in the tense silence. Adrian kept himself positioned near the door the entire descent, one hand resting near his coat, his eyes fixed on the gap between the doors, as though danger might appear the instant they opened. When the elevator finally reached the ground floor, Adrian eased the door open just enough to check the alley beyond, then motioned for us to follow. The night air hit my face, cold and sharp, carrying the distant sound of raised voices from somewhere near the front of the building, the men still searching floors we had already left behind. A car idled at the mouth of the alley, engine running, one of Adrian's men holding the rear door open with quiet urgency. We were halfway across the alley when a shout rang out behind us, sharp and sudden, followed by the unmistakable sound of footsteps breaking into a run. "Go!" Adrian said, pushing Daniel and me toward the open car door, while turning to face whoever had spotted us. "Adrian. Go, Elena, now." I hesitated only a heartbeat before Daniel pulled me forward, both of us scrambling into the back seat as the driver revved the engine, ready to move the moment Adrian joined us. Through the rear window, I watched him stand his ground for one long, terrifying second. 2 men closing the distance fast, before he moved with a speed and precision that startled me, closing the gap toward the nearest man, before either of them could close it on him. Whatever happened in those brief seconds happened too fast for me to fully process, a blur of motion and controlled force that ended with both men on the ground and Adrian sprinting back toward the car without a single wasted movement. He threw himself into the front seat, slamming the door as the driver pulled away, tires screeching against wet pavement. "Is everyone all right?" he asked, twisting around to look at us, his breathing controlled, despite everything that had just happened. "We are fine," I managed, though my voice shook more than I wanted it to. Daniel sat frozen beside me, staring at Adrian with a mixture of fear and stunned gratitude. "You could have been killed," I said, anger and relief tangled together in my chest. "So could you," Adrian said simply, facing forward again as the car sped through quiet streets, putting distance between us and the apartment building. "I made my choice. You are both safe. That is what matters tonight." Silence settled over the car, thick with adrenaline, slowly draining out of all of us. Daniel reached over at some point and gripped my hand, tight and trembling, an unspoken apology passing between us for everything his mistakes had cost me in the last day. I squeezed back, too exhausted and too shaken to voice the forgiveness I already felt. "Where are we going now?" I asked finally, breaking the heavy quiet. "Somewhere Hale will not think to look," Adrian said, "and somewhere I can begin arranging the details of buying his debt before he decides Daniel is worth more trouble than he is currently willing to admit." "And if he refuses to sell it?" Adrian's eyes met mine in the rearview mirror, calm and certain despite everything that had just happened. "Then I will find another way to make the debt disappear. One way or another. This ends soon, Elena. I promise you that." I wanted to believe him completely, wanted to let the promise settle over me the way exhaustion was already settling into my bones. But some cautious, guarded part of me still hesitated, aware that promises made in the heat of danger did not always survive contact with the complicated reality waiting for us the following morning. Still, as the city lights blurred past the window and Daniel's trembling hand slowly steadied in mine, I allowed myself, just for tonight, to hope that Adrian's certainty was not misplaced. 3 days passed in the quiet house Adrian moved us to, a place tucked behind tall gates and taller hedges, far enough from the city that the sound of traffic never reached the windows. Daniel spent most of his time pacing, restless with guilt he did not know how to express, while I split my hours between healing ribs and a growing, uneasy curiosity about the man who had upended our lives without asking permission. On the 4th morning, I woke to an empty house. Daniel's room was untouched, his bag gone, and a note left on the kitchen counter in handwriting I recognized as his, hurried and apologetic, explaining that he could not sit still while I paid the price for his mistakes, that he needed to see Adrian's progress with his own eyes, that he would be back before dark. Panic set in fast, sharp and cold. I called the number Adrian had given me, and within minutes, a car arrived to take me to wherever Daniel had gone, though the driver refused to explain the destination beyond a single tense sentence. Mr. Voss did not know he left. The building we arrived at looked nothing like the brownstone from that first night. It was industrial, gray, tucked behind a row of warehouses near the docks, the kind of place that existed specifically to avoid attention. Inside, the air smelled of paper and ink, and rows of men sat at long tables, hunched over ledgers thick with numbers that meant nothing to me, and everything to the people whose lives depended on them. I found Daniel near the back, standing beside a man I did not recognize, both of them staring down at an open ledger with tense, unreadable expressions. Relief and fury collided inside me the moment I saw him, safe but clearly somewhere he should never have gone alone. "Daniel," I said, crossing the room quickly. "What are you doing here?" He turned, guilt flashing across his face. "I needed to see it for myself, Elena. I needed to know he was actually doing what he said he would." Before I could respond, Adrian appeared from a side office, his expression shifting from surprise to something guarded the moment he saw me standing in the middle of what was clearly not meant to be seen by outsiders. "You should not be here," he said, crossing the room quickly, his voice low but edged with genuine concern. "Neither should he," I said, gesturing toward Daniel. "What is this place?" Adrian hesitated, glancing at the rows of men still bent over their ledgers, before answering. "This is where debts are tracked. Mine, and others I have absorbed over the years to keep desperate people out of worse hands than my own." "Absorbed how?" "By buying them," he said simply. "Taking control of the terms, softening the interest, giving people a chance to actually pay their way free instead of drowning slowly." I looked around the room again, seeing it differently now, though the unease in my chest did not fully settle. And Daniel's debt. Adrian's jaw tightened slightly. "Already purchased," Hale sold it faster than I expected, likely because losing does not interest him nearly as much as the money did. Then why does Daniel still look terrified? I asked, glancing toward my brother, who had gone very quiet, his eyes fixed on the ledger open on the table beside him. Daniel finally spoke, his voice hollow. Because the number is worse than I thought, Elena. Hale added fees I never agreed to, penalties for missed deadlines I did not even know existed. Adrian bought the debt, but it is still enormous. How enormous? I asked, dread pooling low in my stomach. Adrian answered before Daniel could, his tone steady but grave. Large enough that paying it off honestly would take years, even with reasonable terms. Hale built these debts specifically to trap people permanently, not to be repaid. So, what happens now? Now, Adrian said, I decide how much of that number Daniel actually owes, since I control the terms. Something in the casual authority of the statement unsettled me more than I expected. You can just decide that? I can, he said simply. It is my ledger now. I studied him carefully, the calm certainty in his expression, the easy authority with which he spoke about numbers large enough to ruin a life. Adrian, this is exactly what worried me about all of this. You are talking about my brother's life like it is a line in your accounting. It is not like that, he said, something sharper entering his voice, though it was directed more at the situation than at me. I am trying to protect him from a system designed to consume him. That requires control, Elena, whether it is comfortable for you to watch or not. Control is exactly what worries me, I said, my voice rising despite myself. You bought my brother's debt without asking either of us. You brought him here without telling me. You are making decisions about our lives, and I do not know if that makes you different from Hale, or simply better dressed. The words landed harder than I intended, and I watched something flicker across Adrian's face, hurt, disguised quickly behind careful composure. Daniel shifted uncomfortably beside us, clearly wishing to be anywhere else in the building. That is not fair, Adrian said quietly. Maybe not, I admitted, but it is honest. He was silent for a long moment, studying me with an intensity that made the space between us feel smaller, despite the distance still separating us. You are right, that I should have told you he was here the moment he arrived, he said finally. That was a mistake, and I apologize for it. But I am not doing this to control your lives, Elena. I am doing it because the alternative is watching two people who already survived enough get crushed by men who see them as nothing more than numbers. The sincerity in his voice softened some of the anger still burning in my chest, though not all of it. Show me, I said finally. Show me the actual number, and what you intend to do about it. Adrian hesitated only briefly before nodding, leading both of us toward the ledger Daniel had been studying. He pointed toward a column of figures, explaining the original loan, the inflated interest, the penalties added without Daniel's knowledge or consent, each one designed to make repayment nearly impossible. And this, Adrian said, pointing toward a final number written in different ink, is what I am setting the debt to instead. Reasonable interest. A payment plan Daniel can actually manage. No penalties designed to trap him further. The new number was still significant, but nowhere near the crushing weight of the original figure. I studied it carefully, then looked up at Adrian, searching his expression for any sign of manipulation, and finding none. Why would you do this? I asked quietly, truthfully. Adrian held my gaze, something unguarded slipping through the careful composure he usually wore like armor. Because the first night I met you, you refused to give up your brother's name, even while barely able to stand. That kind of loyalty deserves more than being punished by a system built to exploit it. Daniel, quiet until now, spoke up, his voice rough with emotion. I do not know how to repay this, he said, gesturing vaguely at the room, at the debt, at everything Adrian had done in the last few days. You repay it by making better choices moving forward, Adrian said simply. That is the only repayment I am interested in. The tension in the room eased slightly, though the earlier argument between Adrian and me still lingered, unresolved beneath the surface. Daniel excused himself quietly, murmuring something about needing air, leaving Adrian and me alone amid the rows of ledgers and the quiet hum of men working through numbers that controlled far too many lives. I meant what I said, Adrian said finally, breaking the silence between us. About making a mistake by not telling you Daniel was here. I know, I said. But I also meant what I said about control, Adrian. I cannot keep operating in a world where decisions about my life are made without my knowledge, even if the intentions behind them are good. Understood, he said, and something in the simple, immediate acceptance of the boundary eased more of my anger than any lengthy apology could have. From now on, you are informed, every step. I studied him for a long moment, the careful vulnerability still visible beneath his usual composure, and felt something shift quietly in my chest. Something I was not yet ready to name but could no longer fully deny either. Whatever this was becoming between us, it was no longer as simple as gratitude toward a stranger who had once found me broken in an alley. There is still Hale, I said finally, pulling the conversation back toward safer ground. Buying the debt does not erase whatever grudge sent him after Daniel in the first place. Adrian's expression sobered, the warmth from a moment ago replaced by something colder, more calculating. No, he agreed, it does not. And I suspect Hale will not simply accept losing this quietly. What does that mean for us? It means, Adrian said slowly, that whatever comes next will likely be far more dangerous than anything that has happened so far. We walked out of the ledger room together, past rows of men who did not look up from their work, past the industrial hum of a building designed to process other people's desperation into neat, manageable columns. Outside, the docks stretched wide and gray under an overcast sky, cranes standing motionless in the distance like sleeping giants. Walk with me, Adrian said, gesturing toward a path that ran along the water, away from the building and the men still waiting inside for instructions. I hesitated only briefly before falling into step beside him, the cool air a welcome relief after the tension of the ledger room. You never told me how you started doing this, I said after a while, watching the water ripple dark and restless beside us. Buying debts. Protecting people from men like Hale. Adrian was quiet for a long moment, his hands tucked into his coat pockets, his gaze fixed somewhere on the horizon. My mother borrowed money once, he said finally, from a man very much like Hale. I was young, younger than Daniel is now. I watched what that debt did to her, how it grew faster than she could ever hope to outrun it, how it eventually cost her everything, including her life. The admission startled me, quiet and raw in a way that felt far removed from the composed, controlled man I had come to know over the last few days. Adrian, I am sorry. It was a long time ago, he said, though the tightness in his voice suggested the wound had never fully healed, only scarred over. But I promised myself, once I had the means to do something about it, that I would never let another family suffer the same way mine did, not while I had the power to prevent it. Is that why you help people like Daniel? Like me? Partly, he admitted, though I will not pretend the reasons are entirely selfless. There is satisfaction in taking something from men like Hale, in dismantling the systems they build to trap people who never had a fair chance to begin with. I studied his profile as he spoke, the sharp lines of his face softened slightly by the gray afternoon light, and felt the earlier anger from the ledger room settling into something gentler, something closer to understanding. You could have told me that from the beginning, I said quietly. It would have explained a great deal. Perhaps, he said, glancing toward me with a faint, tired smile. But some things are easier to show than to explain, especially to someone who has every reason to doubt a man who appears out of nowhere in an alley, claiming he wants to help. The honesty in his words eased something tight in my chest, and for a moment, the danger surrounding us, Hale, the debt, the men who had broken my ribs only days earlier, faded into the background, replaced by the quiet, unexpected comfort of walking beside someone who no longer felt entirely like a stranger. Thank you, I said finally, for Daniel, for me, even if I do not fully understand your reasons yet. You do not need to understand them completely, Adrian said, only to trust that they are genuine. I am starting to, I admitted, surprising myself with how easily the words came. Something shifted in his expression at that, warm and unguarded in a way I had not yet seen from him, before the careful composure returned, tempered now with something softer underneath. We walked in comfortable silence for a while longer, the sound of water lapping against the dock the only noise between us, until his phone buzzed sharply, breaking the fragile peace we had found. He read the message quickly, and I watched his expression harden, the warmth from moments ago replaced by tight, focused tension. "What is it?" I asked, dread already curling low in my stomach. "Hale," he said grimly. "He knows the debt has been bought, and he is not pleased about losing it." "What does that mean?" Adrian slipped the phone back into his coat, his jaw set in a way that reminded me sharply of the man who had faced down 2 attackers outside Daniel's apartment without hesitation. "It means he intends to remind us that losing a debt does not mean losing leverage entirely. And I suspect he will not wait long to prove that point." The warning settled heavily between us, and for the first time since the alley, I found myself less afraid of Adrian himself, and far more afraid of whatever storm his intervention had set into motion, a storm that showed no sign of settling anytime soon. Hale did not wait long. 2 days after Adrian showed me the ledger, a message arrived at the house, delivered by hand, sealed in plain white paper, that revealed nothing of the danger it carried, until Adrian read it in silence, his face draining of color for the first time since I had known him. "What does it say?" I asked, watching him fold the paper closed with careful, deliberate movements that did nothing to hide the tension in his hands. "Hale wants a meeting," he said finally, "tonight. He claims it concerns unfinished business regarding territory I took from him 3 years ago, long before either of you were involved." "Territory?" Adrian's jaw tightened. "The docks, the warehouses, business that used to belong to him before I forced him out of this part of the city. Buying Daniel's debt was simply the excuse he needed to resurface." The revelation landed heavily, reshaping everything I thought I understood about the danger surrounding us. So this was never really about Daniel's debt at all. "No," Adrian admitted. "I suspect the debt was simply a means of drawing you close enough to reach me. You were never truly the target that night in the alley, Elena. I was." The words settled cold and sharp in my chest, memories of that first night rearranging themselves into a shape I had not considered. The men in the alley had not stumbled upon me randomly. They had been waiting, using my connection to Daniel, and through him, to whatever fragile trust I might eventually place in Adrian, as bait for something far larger than either of us had realized. "You knew this was possible," I said slowly. "From the beginning." "I suspected," Adrian corrected. "I did not know for certain, until tonight's message confirmed it. And you still let me stay close to you, knowing I might have been used against you the entire time?" Adrian met my gaze steadily, something raw and unguarded flickering behind his careful composure. "Walking away from you was never something I seriously considered, Elena, regardless of the risk." The admission startled me, quiet and honest in a way that cut through the fear tightening my chest. Before I could respond, Daniel appeared in the doorway, his expression tense, as he had clearly overheard enough of the conversation to understand the danger it carried. "What happens now?" Daniel asked. "Now," Adrian said, straightening with renewed, controlled purpose, "I go to this meeting, and I end whatever Hale believes he still has claim to. Alone? I will not risk either of you being anywhere near Hale again," Adrian said firmly. "You stay here, protected, while I handle this." "No," I said, the word leaving my mouth before I had fully decided to speak it. "I am not staying behind while you walk into danger that exists partly because of decisions made to protect my brother and me." "Elena." "I am not asking permission, Adrian. I am telling you I am coming." He studied me for a long moment, frustration and something softer, more reluctant, tangled together behind his eyes. "This is not negotiable in the way you think it is," he said finally. "Hale is dangerous in ways you have not yet witnessed. If something happens to you tonight, then it happens to me making my own choice," I interrupted, my voice steady despite the fear pulsing beneath it. "Not hiding behind someone else's protection while people I care about face danger without me." Something shifted in his expression, resignation mixed with a reluctant, unfamiliar tenderness. "You are impossible," he said quietly. "So I have been told." Daniel insisted on coming as well, though Adrian firmly overruled him, instructing him instead to remain at the house under guard, a compromise Daniel accepted only after significant, tense negotiation. By the time the car pulled away from the house that evening, carrying Adrian and me toward whatever waited at the docks, the sky had darkened into deep, heavy gray, clouds pressing low over the city like a warning. The meeting location was an old warehouse near the water, one of the buildings Adrian had mentioned earlier, quiet and abandoned except for the handful of cars already parked outside when we arrived. Adrian's men positioned themselves discreetly around the perimeter as we approached the entrance, though the air still felt thick with danger despite the careful preparation. Inside, the warehouse stretched wide and dim, lit only by a few scattered work lights that cast long shadows across the concrete floor. Victor Hale stood near the center, flanked by 4 men, his posture relaxed in a way that felt deliberately performative, designed to project a confidence I suspected he did not fully feel. "Adrian Voss," Hale said, his voice carrying easily across the empty space. "And the girl from the alley." "How touching." "Say what you came to say, Hale," Adrian said, his voice flat and controlled, though I could feel tension radiating from him even without looking directly at his face. "Straight to business then," Hale said, spreading his hands in mock surrender. "You bought a debt that was never truly about the money, Adrian. We both know that. What I want is simple. The docks. Return what you took 3 years ago, and I will consider tonight's conversation the end of the matter entirely." "You lost the docks fairly," Adrian said. "I will not be returning anything." Hale's expression sharpened, the performative calm slipping slightly to reveal something colder underneath. "Then perhaps you will reconsider once you understand what continuing to refuse will cost you." His gaze shifted toward me deliberately, and my stomach twisted with sudden, sharp fear. Adrian stepped slightly in front of me, his voice dropping into something low and dangerous I had not heard from him before. "Touch her, and nothing you have built will remain standing by morning," he said, each word measured and absolute. "Bold words," Hale said, though something in his posture suggested he understood the weight behind them. "But words are not territory, Adrian." The tension in the warehouse stretched taut, every man present watching the standoff with careful, practiced stillness, waiting for whichever side moved first. My heart pounded loudly enough that I was certain everyone could hear it, my mind racing through everything Daniel had told me, everything Adrian had shown me in the ledger room, piecing together a picture of exactly how far men like Hale were willing to go once cornered. "I have an alternative proposal," I said suddenly, my voice steadier than I expected given the fear coiling through my chest. Every eye in the warehouse turned toward me, including Adrian's, surprise flickering briefly across his expression before settling into cautious attention. "Elena, let me finish," I said quietly, before turning my attention fully toward Hale. "You want the docks because they represent power you lost, not because you actually need them financially. Drian has resources far beyond a single stretch of waterfront. What if the real value here is not the property itself, but what continuing this conflict will cost both of you?" Hale studied me with narrowed, calculating interest. "Go on." "Every day this continues, you both lose men, resources, attention from people neither of you want watching too closely," I continued, drawing on instincts sharpened by years of managing Daniel's chaos and my own precarious survival. "Adrian will not return the docks. But perhaps there is something else worth negotiating, something that lets you walk away with genuine value instead of empty pride." "And what exactly would that be?" Hale asked, though his tone had shifted, curiosity replacing some of the earlier hostility. I glanced toward Adrian briefly, silently asking permission to continue, and found something unexpected in his expression, not annoyance at my interference, but genuine, startled respect. He gave the smallest nod, and I turned back toward Hale. "A percentage of future shipping revenue from the docks, formalized through legitimate contracts rather than territorial claims," I said. "Something you can build on that does not require constant conflict to maintain." Silence stretched through the warehouse as Hale considered the proposal, his men exchanging uncertain glances, clearly unaccustomed to negotiations shifting so unexpectedly. Finally, Hale's mouth curved into something that was not quite a smile, sharp and assessing. "You are clever," he said, addressing me directly for the first time. "Clever enough that I understand now why Adrian went to such trouble protecting you." "Do we have an agreement?" Adrian asked, his voice carefully neutral despite the tension still humming beneath the surface. Hale considered for a long moment before nodding slowly. "Draft the terms," If they are reasonable, I will sign them. But Adrian, he added, his tone hardening slightly, this ends tonight, permanently. No further complications. Agreed, Adrian said. Hale turned to leave, his men falling into step behind him, and for one brief moment, it seemed the danger had genuinely passed. Then one of his men, younger than the others, hesitated near the doorway, his hand drifting toward his jacket, with a stiffness that betrayed nerves rather than discipline. My breath caught, and beside me, Adrian went utterly still, the way a predator goes still before it moves. Do not, Adrian said, his voice low and even, carrying easily across the warehouse despite its quiet. The young man froze, glancing toward Hale for direction, uncertainty flickering across his face. Hale turned back sharply, his own expression darkening with something close to fury, directed entirely at his own man. Stand down, Hale snapped. We have an agreement. I will not have it undone by a boy too eager to prove himself. The young man lowered his hand slowly, though the tension in the warehouse remained sharp enough to taste. Every one of Adrian's men, now visibly alert, near the edges of the room, ready to respond if the moment tipped the wrong direction. I realized I had been holding my breath and forced myself to exhale slowly, my pulse still hammering against my healing ribs. You should control your people more carefully, Hale, Adrian said, his tone deceptively calm. Mistakes like that tend to end agreements rather than seal them. It will not happen again, Hale said tightly, gripping the young man's shoulder hard enough to make him flinch before steering him firmly toward the door. You have my word, Voss. The terms stand. Draft the contracts. They will be ready within the week, Adrian said. Hale paused at the threshold, glancing back once more, his gaze settling on me with an expression I could not quite decipher, something between reluctant respect and lingering calculation. You are fortunate, he said quietly, that she is as clever as she is loyal. Not many men find both in the same person. He left without waiting for a response, his men trailing behind him into the darkness beyond the warehouse doors, engines starting somewhere outside a moment later, tires crunching against gravel, as the cars pulled away into the night. Only once the sound had faded completely did the tension in my shoulders finally begin to loosen, replaced by a trembling, delayed reaction to everything that had nearly happened. Adrian turned to me immediately, his hands finding my shoulders with careful urgency, searching my face for any sign that the danger had left a mark deeper than fear. Are you hurt? He asked. No, I managed, though my voice shook slightly. That was close. Closer than I would have liked, he admitted, exhaling slowly, some of his own careful composure slipping to reveal how tightly he had been holding himself together throughout the entire negotiation. You should not have been here for that. I am glad I was, I said, and meant it, despite the fear still coursing through me. It ended the way it did because I was. Something in his expression softened at that, admiration mixing with the lingering worry still etched into his features. Yes, he agreed quietly, it did. The tension in the warehouse eased gradually as we finally moved toward the exit, the immediate danger dissolving into something that felt, remarkably, like the beginning of genuine resolution. Adrian turned toward me the moment we were alone, his expression a mixture of disbelief and something warmer, something that made my pulse quicken despite the exhaustion pulling at every part of me. You could have gotten yourself killed, he said, though his tone carried no real anger, only lingering shock at what had just happened. But I did not, I said, and now this is actually over. You are extraordinary, he said quietly, closing the distance between us until barely any space remained. Do you know that? You have mentioned something similar before, I said, breathless despite myself. I meant it more tonight than I have ever meant anything, he said, his hand rising to gently touch the side of my face, careful and deliberate, as though I were something precious he was still learning how to hold. We walked out of the warehouse together, into the cool night air, the danger that had shadowed every moment since that first night in the alley finally beginning to lift. Daniel greeted us back at the house with visible relief, listening in stunned silence as we explained everything that had happened, the negotiation, the resolution, the fragile peace we had somehow managed to secure. Later that night, once Daniel had retreated to his room and the house had settled into quiet, Adrian found me on the back porch, staring out at the dark garden beyond, my mind still processing everything that had changed in the span of less than a week. "You never did answer a question I asked you, that first night," he said, settling beside me. "Which question?" "Who broke your ribs?" I turned to look at him, a faint smile tugging at my mouth despite everything we had survived to reach this quiet moment. "Men who worked for someone who wanted leverage against you," I said, "though I suspect you already knew that." "I did," he admitted. "I simply wanted to hear you say it, now that the danger has passed." We sat together in comfortable silence, the weight of the past week settling into something that felt less like trauma and more like the foundation of an unexpected beginning. I thought about the alley, about the stranger who had stepped out of a car and refused to let me disappear back into darkness, and realized how completely everything had changed since that first, terrifying night. "What happens now?" I asked quietly. Adrian reached over, taking my hand in his with a gentleness that contradicted everything I had first believed about him in that alley. "Now," he said, "I would like the chance to know you properly, without alleys or debts or danger standing between us." "I think I would like that too," I said, and for the first time since the men had cornered me outside the club, the fear that had lived constantly beneath my skin, finally, quietly, began to fade, replaced by something steadier, something that felt, against every expectation, like hope. The following weeks passed with a strange, unfamiliar calm, the kind I had almost forgotten how to recognize. Daniel found honest work through a contact of Adrian's, steady and unremarkable in exactly the way his life had needed for years, and slowly, the guilt he carried began to ease into something closer to quiet gratitude. The contracts with Hale were signed without incident, formal and binding, transforming what had once been a violent rivalry into something almost mundane, numbers on paper instead of threats in the dark. I found myself at Adrian's house more often than my own, not out of necessity anymore, but by choice, drawn back again and again by conversations that stretched late into the evening, quiet dinners that had nothing to do with danger or debts, moments where the careful, controlled man from that first night in the alley slowly revealed himself to be someone far gentler than I had ever expected. One evening, months after everything had settled, he drove me back to that same alley behind the club, parking the car in nearly the exact spot where he had first found me broken and afraid. I looked at him, confused, as he came around to open my door the way he always insisted on doing, regardless of how many times I told him it was unnecessary. "Why here?" I asked, stepping out into the cool evening air. "Because I wanted to remember it properly," he said, studying the alley with an expression I could not quite read. "Not as the place where I found you hurt, but as the place where everything that matters most to me now actually began." I studied his face in the fading light, the sharp lines softened now by something steady and unmistakably tender, and felt the last remnants of fear I had carried since that night finally settle into something warm and certain instead. "I did not think a place like this could ever feel like anything other than frightening," I admitted quietly. "Neither did I," Adrian said, reaching for my hand, "until you." We stood together in the quiet alley, the same brick walls, the same flickering sign above the same side door, transformed now by everything that had happened since, by everything we had survived and built together in the months that followed. Whatever fear had once lived in this narrow space between buildings had been replaced entirely by something neither of us had expected to find here, something steady, something real, something that felt, at long last, like home. Later, back in the car that had once carried me away from danger, and now simply carried me toward him, I rested my head against his shoulder, exhaustion and contentment mingling together in a way that felt entirely unfamiliar after years of bracing constantly against the next disaster. Adrian's hand found mine in the quiet dark, steady and warm, and for the first time in longer than I could remember, I let myself believe, completely, that the storm had finally, truly passed.